cases. Jack Smith has already put pressure on defendant Trump after winning that partial gag order. Now, if you've been following the news at all here in America, you probably know that D.A. Willis has just won convictions on the eve of her first RICO trial. Indeed, that trial was supposed to start today, but she won it so decisively, there is no trial. I'll explain. 2 Trump lawyers pled guilty 2 days in a row to end just last week. Defendant Trump is showing new concern today that he is worried they will testify against him and it will be damaging. He's posted a new statement which asserts, referring to Sidney Powell, that she was, quote, one of millions who thought the 2020 presidential election was rigged and stolen. That's his typo, by the way. He goes on to say, quote, Ms. Powell was not my attorney and never was. That claim is false, but it is also telling. And I'll show you exactly why. But here was then lead Trump attorney Giuliani introducing his co-counsel turned co-defendants, Powell and Ellis.
This is representative of our legal team. We're representing President Trump and we're representing the Trump campaign. When I finish, Sidney Powell and then Jenna Ellis will follow me.
Powell and Ellis from the mouth of Giuliani, and you see them there. Also having a sidebar chat at their many press conferences during that period that they were trying to steal the election. Powell worked for Trump. Trump even mused about promoting her to a newly created position that would have helped with a potential military coup plot, which they did abandon. So what I just told you about Donald Trump's effort to muddy their links now and what she did for him is a very specific thing. It is an acknowledgement in a way that she matters. It is a response to her and the other attorney, Chesbrough, flipping at the end of last week.
How do you plead to the 6 counts of conspiracy to commit intentional interference with performance of election duties?
Guilty.
How do you plead to count 15, conspiracy to commit filing false documents in indictment number 23SC188947?
Guilty.
Can you please state your true and correct legal name?
Sidney Catherine Powell.
State your true and correct legal name.
Kenneth John Chesbrough.
How old are you, ma'am?
Oh, gosh. 68, despite my astonishingly youthful countenance.
How old are you and how far did you go in school, sir?
62, I went through law school.
Are you pleading guilty today because you agree that there is a sufficient factual basis, that there are enough facts that support this plea of guilty?
I do.
Are you pleading guilty today because you agree that there is a factual basis that supports this remaining charge?
Yes, this charge.
Yes, I do. Guilty. They did it. That's what went down in that courtroom at the end of the week, Thursday, Friday. There is a lot going on, whether you follow international news, which of course affects so many people, including people in the United States, and we've all been covering that, living through it. There's also a lot going on in politics, the speaker's race, the vacancy there, Donald Trump's nominee, Jim Jordan, having to bow out after being rejected by Republicans. So whatever you're interested in terms of national news, there's a lot going on. And Thursday and Friday, those were big stories. We covered them here, but anyone could be forgiven for busily going on with their day and not knowing all the details of that. But Donald Trump knows the details. He is on this like a laser right now because he understands that these are people who can't just be dismissed legally. He can attack them publicly, politically, rhetorically. But legally, these are witnesses. They will be sworn in under oath. And if these cases proceed as we expect, juries will hear these people who aren't just saying bad things about Trump, but they're people who fought for Trump to the very end, up until their own indictment. And so for some jurors, that might be more credible than, say, other people who are seen to be critical or observing at a distance. You know, a witness can be at a distance, too. A witness can say, I saw him across the way. I mean, the Georgia elections official who heard Trump's phone call asking to find votes, he's a witness, but at a distance. These people are right up close. These lawyers know a lot from their own roles. Remember, Powell is also listed as co-conspirator 3 in Jack Smith's Trump indictment, which showed evidence of her working on those Trump briefs in lawsuits and responding to legal plans, where they discussed putting material for suits in Georgia and Pennsylvania. But if Trump commits to his new denial in court, he'll actually undercut efforts to keep any conversations with Powell privileged. So he's kind of damned if he does, damned if he doesn't, even if he's lying about the fact that, of course, she was his lawyer. But what is happening in this case, big picture, as we take it all in and Trump responds today? One, prosecutors are winning the first clashes with Trump over what are now his aides' convicted crimes to steal an American election. That's a big deal. That's never happened before, and Trump's aides are losing. Now, that could change. But early cases matter a lot because they set a precedent and they set up evidence, including witnesses, right? We call that testimonial evidence. It's just witnesses for later cases, and that goes up the line. So that's one big thing tonight as we start the week. Two, we're seeing some of the critical cooperating witnesses come into view. Trump and the prosecutors could disagree on practically everything. We don't often come on the air and tell you about how D.A. Willis and Trump or Jack Smith and Trump agree on things, but check this out tonight as we start the week and Trump goes public on what is clearly scaring him. Here's one thing they do agree on, Trump and D.A. Willis. They agree that Sidney Powell matters. As a convicted criminal, veteran Trump aide, and cooperating witness, Powell matters. She matters to prosecutors who will use her and her testimony to try to put others on trial. It is a group RICO case. Most people haven't been tried yet. But Trump, the defendant, also thinks she matters. In fact, he thinks she matters so much that he's not just doing the thing of turning on her in public, but he's trying to specifically make claims to distance her from him, as he has with others beforehand. We've seen that. Now that brings me to point three. Some dominoes are falling. A few could have predicted at the beginning who would crack first. And by the way, if you were playing that game, many would not have predicted Sidney Powell. She sometimes performed as such a supposed true believer that even Trump reportedly dubbed her, quote, crazy. But Powell's the first domino in Trump's orbit, and her public vow to testify against others made her former colleague Chesbrough crack and confess, as I showed you the very next day, Friday. If you follow the news, you may recall it. If you were busy on your Friday, you may not know, oh, another one cracked, another domino fell. He would have faced her damning testimony at his own trial and risked much harsher jail punishment if convicted. So tonight, as we start the new week and Trump responds, the big question is, of course, the simple one. Sometimes this stuff's complicated. Sometimes it ain't that complicated. Are there more dominoes? We don't know. I can't tell you. I can't prove that up yet. It's a predictive matter at this point. I can report for you that the DA is building a RICO case with a theory of dominoes, that they want more than two. They got three total. They got two Trump dominoes, people who work with him, and they want more. These two witnesses could be incriminating for others linked to the coup efforts. And specifically, the other top defendant, other than former President Trump, is White House veteran Mark Meadows, who was getting updates from Powell about her plot to, we now can say, illegally abuse voting software. As of Thursday, that became a now convicted crime in the Georgia plot, that voting data breach, a brazen scheme to break into local voting machines. That's sort of physical vote stealing, different than sort of the broader Washington-based coup ideas. So Powell can testify about what Mark Meadows knew about that and whether he participated in it. She could also speak to Meadows' potential culpability in the charges he faces for soliciting the violation of oath by a public officer in those broader efforts that I mentioned, talking to a Georgia elections official. Just as the other convicted Trump legal vet, Chesbrough, can testify about whether Meadows or others participated in the elector fraud, which is now his confessed guilty portion of the plotting. And that is the first felony confession by any Trump aide for Jan 6 activities. He put those plots in writing. And you can see here, at the very bottom, that data breach convicted is the Powell plot. The electors plot, the very first on top, and it's first up there because it started the earliest, is now convicted. I cannot fairly or journalistically tell you whether any of those other plots will be convicted. They are indicted, but legally, the people that are indicted for those yellow plots are presumed innocent. We will see what happens. I can tell you that the red arrows on your screen are now, in all of American history, these convicted Trump coup crimes. That's new as of Thursday and Friday. And for all the talk about whether people believe their own lies on behalf of Donald Trump or others, I want to show you something else relatively recent as we take all this new information together. Notice how I'm going to show you both in the courtroom and in general, Chesbrough's lawyer confirms all along the big lie that Chesbrough, the now convicted felony Trump aide, knew Donald Trump lost.
The defendant created and distributed false electoral college documents to individuals in Georgia and other states.
Mr. Chesborough never believed in the big lie.
And are you pleading guilty today because you agree that there is a factual basis that supports this remaining charge?
Yes, this charge.
If you ask Mr. Chesborough today who won the 2020 presidential election, he would say Joe Biden.
If you asked him, well, who was asking? That's not a rhetorical question, as they say. D.A. Willis's team could ask him, as well as the other convict, Sidney Powell, under oath about that set of activities, that coup-related crime, that now convicted fraud felony. They could ask what other co-defendants did. Now, Chesborough is less well-known than, say, Powell, but he worked with the very well-known Giuliani and Eastman, both of whom, I should say, if I want to get my grammar right, but both of whom were architects of not only what went down in Georgia, which is being prosecuted for specific reasons based on the evidence there, but what stretched all the way back to Washington, to the coup plot, to what Jim Jordan and Ted Cruz and others hoped to do in Washington. So with the lies crumbling and some of these convicted lawyers for Donald Trump now turning state's witness, the big question is the simple one. Sometimes the big questions are simple. Is this the beginning of many dominoes falling? Or, again, in fairness to the other defendants and the theory of the case, is this a few people cracking early, people who had agitated for a speedy trial? Those lawyers requested it. And that doesn't mean that we're going to get 5 more dominoes. That is the big question. And like I mentioned, in all reality, there's a lot going on. So not everyone is following this super closely. It is the top story right now tonight, because it's a big deal when the top people who work directly for the former president of the United States admit in court, we did it.